So, when I say Gallipoli, what comes to mind? For most of us, it's probably images of trenches, incredible hardship, and those legendary Anzac landings. But today, we're going to look past the beaches to uncover the hidden war that arguably decided the whole thing. We're diving into a story of naval strategy, amazing ingenuity, and logistics that often gets left out of the main story.
I mean, what if the story you think you know is really only half the story? We're going to make the case that the real victory at Gallipoli wasn't won with rifles in the trenches, but with torpedoes, supply lines, and some incredible acts of cleverness out on the water.
You've probably seen the pictures, right? The images from the Gallipoli land campaign are absolutely etched into our collective memory. They tell this powerful story of immense bravery and just horrific sacrifice.
Yeah, that's the narrative we all know so well. Allied forces, mostly from Australia, New Zealand, Britain, and France, land on the peninsula, and they are met with this incredibly fierce Ottoman defense. What came next was 8 long months of brutal, grinding warfare that, as we know, ended with the Allies pulling out. But focusing only on that part of the story, it kind of misses the bigger picture.
Okay, so let's do just that. Let's shift our focus from the dusty hills and trenches to the water. The argument we're exploring here is that the entire campaign, from the very beginning to the very end, was actually decided at sea.
And you know who got this right, like a century before the war even started? Napoleon. He knew that controlling the Dardanelles Straits was the key to everything. The whole Allied plan hinged on this: force the Straits, capture Istanbul, knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war, and, this was a big one, open the supply line to their struggling ally Russia. It was always a naval objective first.
And listen, this wasn't some quick little battle. The naval fight here wasn't just that one famous attack on March 18th. No way. It was this relentless 4-year struggle that really kicked off the moment German warships slipped into the Straits back in 1914. It involved everything: mines, submarines, even some of the very first uses of electronic warfare.
To really get why the sea was so unbelievably critical, we need to talk about the one thing that isn't always glamorous, but wins or loses almost every single war: logistics.
All right, check this out. By the end of the campaign, the Ottoman Fifth Army defending that peninsula had grown to this size: 350,000 soldiers. Now, just stop and think about that for a second. How do you feed, arm, and bring in reinforcements for an army that massive on a remote piece of land with terrible roads? The answer is, you don't. At least not by land.
Now this is where things get really interesting. At the exact same time as Gallipoli, the Ottomans were fighting this other, absolutely disastrous campaign against Russia at Sarıkamış. So why were the outcomes so different? Well, at Gallipoli, the Ottoman Navy, even though it was totally outgunned, managed to keep the sea lanes from Istanbul open. They were ferrying troops, food, ammo, everything. But at Sarıkamış, the Russian Navy sank the 3 main Ottoman supply ships. The result was an absolute catastrophe.
I mean, this quote just says it all, doesn't it? The battle on the land was decided by what happened out on the water. And that exact same principle applied to Gallipoli.
And if you need more proof, it comes straight from the top. The German general who was commanding the Ottoman defense, he said it himself. He stated, very plainly, that if the naval transport line through the Sea of Marmara had been cut, his army would have just starved. It would have disintegrated. So here's the bottom line. The entire land battle was completely dependent on this one, very fragile naval lifeline.
So knowing this, the Allies didn't just give up after that first big naval attack failed. Oh no. This kicked off a deadly and frankly ingenious war of wits that was fought both above and below the waves.
Let's look at this number: 26. On the night of March 8, 1915, this small, unassuming Ottoman mine layer called the Nusret snuck out into the Dardanelles. It laid just 26 mines. But here's the genius part. They laid them parallel to the shore in an area the Allies were using to maneuver. Nobody expected a minefield to be there.
And this quote from a British historian just nails the impact. That single, incredibly clever act of laying just 26 mines would directly cause the failure of the main Allied naval attack 10 days later. It's truly one of the most effective tactical moves in all of naval history.
And that one act set the stage for March 18th. The most powerful fleet ever put together steamed into the Straits, ready for action. But as the ships were turning after shelling the forts, they sailed right into the Nusret's hidden minefield. Boom! First, the French battleship Bouvet sinks in 2 minutes. Then, the British battleship Irresistible hits a mine and has to be abandoned. Then, the Ocean, which was sent to help the Irresistible, hits another one and sinks too. 3 massive battleships gone. The unsinkable armada was stopped dead in its tracks.
So the Allies had to come up with a plan B. If they couldn't get their big battleships through the straits, maybe they could send submarines under the minefields to cut that vital supply line we've been talking about. And this kicked off a brutal underwater war in the Sea of Marmara.
And the stakes here were unbelievably high. Look at this. The Allies lost 8 submarines trying to pull this off, but they inflicted a ton of damage in the process, sinking 8 Ottoman warships and over 200 supply vessels. Every single one of those ships that went down meant less food and fewer bullets for the soldiers defending the peninsula.
But the Ottomans adapted with their own clever tactics. Get this. Their radio station at Gonsa figured out how to listen in on Allied communications. So when Allied spotter planes tried to radio coordinates to their massive warships, the Ottoman operators would jump on the same frequency and just start transmitting junk, confusing the signals and throwing off the bombardment. This was an incredibly early and effective use of electronic warfare.
But maybe the most daring action of all was the sinking of the HMS Goliath. I mean, this is like something out of a movie. In a stunning night attack, this tiny little Ottoman torpedo boat snuck into a British anchorage. When it was challenged by the massive Goliath, its captain cleverly mimicked the British warship's own signal, which bought just enough time to get terrifyingly close and fire its torpedoes. The sinking of a giant battleship by such a tiny boat sent an absolute shockwave through the Royal Navy. It proved that no ship was safe.
So why does this hidden naval war matter so much? Because its outcome didn't just decide the Gallipoli campaign. No, its effects echoed right across the globe.
Think about it. By failing to open the straits, the Allies couldn't get supplies to Russia, which helped push it toward collapse and the Bolshevik Revolution. The defeat showed colonies all across the British and French empires that the imperial powers were not invincible, and that fueled independence movements. And, of course, the heroic defense elevated an Ottoman officer named Mustafa Kemal, who you probably know as Ataturk, the founder of the Republic of Turkey.
So when you put it all together, you see that the struggle at sea was the absolute linchpin of the whole campaign. It's what allowed the land army to keep fighting, it broke the back of the initial Allied invasion, and its outcome sent these massive ripples out that really did change the course of the 20th century.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Gallipoli is one of the most famous and studied campaigns in all of military history, and yet its most decisive element is often just hiding there in plain sight. What other pivotal moments are out there just beneath the surface of the stories we think we know?